Hello and welcome. In this tutorial video, I will demonstrate how you can perform small-scale data binning evaluation in the KIWI ExploreLive module. Oftentimes in pharmacokinetics or pharmacodynamic analysis, we have to perform tasks or create visuals that require data to be pulled into bins. For example, in visual predictive checks, we often have to process data that were collected at different time points for different subjects. And we have to determine relevant time interval to compute meaningful statistics representing the distribution of the observed data and the simulated data. Similarly, we often have to create plots that summarize the central tendency of data. For example, showing the effect of a drug concentration on a biomarker because the drug concentration are obtained from a continuous distribution. We have to bin this information to compute mean or median and represent this mean or median profile versus the concentration. So I will demonstrate how you can use the tool provided by ExploreLive to optimize the choice of those bins. I will illustrate how you can use basic settings, such as the selection of the data source, the selection of the variable that need to be broken down into bins, how you can define the interval boundaries, and also how you can use some more advanced settings. I have an ExploreLive session open, and I've already imported a dataset called demo.csv. This is the same pharmacokinetic dataset that we've used in other tutorials. I have used this dataset to create a modified version in which I've only kept sample records from my second study. So I've used this subset expression, study equal 2 and samp equal 1, samp being a marker of the sample records. I will use this data set to illustrate the data binning capabilities. You have to click on the analysis menu and select the data binning option. The interface is divided into two main panels, the binning settings, where you can define your data set and your variables and some other advanced settings. The second panel is where a plot will show up once you have selected the proper information in the first panel. You can select the data source by clicking on this first field. As usual, it is a drop-down listing all the data sets that you have imported, all the modified data sets that you have created, or the pooled data if you have merged or pooled two data sets together. I will select the study 2 only dataset, and we'll switch to the right part of this panel. In the basic settings tab, you can select an x-axis variable, which is the variable that you want to break into intervals or bins. You can also provide an optional y variable. I'll demonstrate that now. I'm going to select the TSFD variable, so a time since first dose. And as soon as I confirm that selection, ExploreLive creates a plot showing the TSFD as the x-axis, and it will assign a random number between 0 and 1 for all those data points. So it allows you to see where the data is richly distributed or more sparsely distributed. If you prefer to see something that is a little bit more familiar to you, like observation versus time, you can add this optional y variable. And in this case, you have a more typical scatterplot design here. This is not necessarily always the best option. to evaluate the number of data points that you have at particular interval of your x-axis variable. So I will just remove this for now and work with a random value instead. So the data binning module does not provide any kind of automated approach to binning. It does not give you an algorithm or a button that you click and where you would get the best, or not necessarily the best, but what the algorithm estimates to be optimal. Instead, you can provide manually the boundaries of limits or intervals that you want to apply on the data. So in this case, I will provide some intervals, some boundaries that I will separate by commas. And every time I add a boundary, the plot gets updated and a line is drawn to show you the one of those limits, or actually every limit will be shown by a specific line. I'm going to add some additional limits, 25, then maybe 50, and then maybe to go around here, maybe 140 something, yes. And then maybe 160, just to give it another one. And just for the sake of it, a last one. So your information is shown on a graphical, with a graphical manner on the plot setting, but it is also summarized in a more numerical fashion in a panel below. This record counts panel shows a little table with all the intervals that you have defined, and it will also show you the count of records in each interval. So the goal is typically, when you're doing data binning, is to provide equally distributed number of counts per bin, especially in a VPC setting. So in this case, I have a first bin with a lot of data point. I may want to break that into 2 bins, and now I have something that is a little bit more equally distributed. So you can see how you could manually change your data or your bins, your bin boundary, sorry, and affect the tables here. This panel contains a copy to clipboard button that will copy the content of this table to your clipboard, and you can copy that to or paste that to a spreadsheet like Excel or word processor, and extract the intervals and process them for the particular needs that you have. The panel also provides some additional information at the bottom, and what is the most critical part is the end. This is a call to an R function called makeBins that will use your TSFD variable and provide the boundaries that you have defined in the first panel. You can copy that call and go back to your data module and use that call in the expression, in transformation expression, to create a variable, essentially a bin variable, that will assign an integer to each of your intervals. So your minus infinity to 2.5, 2.55 will get a 2, and so on. So that will create bins for you in the dataset, or a modified version of the dataset. The second line include a similar call, but the function is different. MakeBins is creating an interval or an integer that marks an interval. The getMedian bins will get the median of median time of your of your data for each bean. So in that case, the median of all the TSFD for the data containing the minus infinity to 2.5. So this would allow you to get a data point that is at the middle here, a data point that is middle here, here, not necessarily in the middle, but at the median TSFD. The goal is that you can use this median time as a value to summarize your data in the Scatterplot module, where you have this functionality to summarize the data by central tendency and viability. So this is a nice functionality to modify your data using the beans that you've determined to be appropriate in the data binning module. Additional functionalities that are offered by this data binning module include paneling. This is similar to the functionality defined in the Scatterplot module tutorial on data stratification. You can provide variables or panel by some variables. So let's say I cannot really stratify by study in this case because I only have one study. I can stratify by dose. And in that case, the display here is broken down into multiple panels. In this case, 4 panels, 1 panel per dose in your data. And the table at the bottom is also broken down in all those panel values. And you can see the number of counts by dose and overall. So that's a way also to see if you use certain binning strategies across stratification, like dose stratification, how they would work, or if you need to adjust those beans for specific stratum of your data. You can also use data subset. This is strictly the same functionality as the that was described in a separate tutorial video on data subsetting. I invite you to watch that tutorial to learn more about how you can use those fields to further subset the data after you've selected a source data set. Finally, some basic graphical settings. You can choose to change the darkness, apply to the background color. The closer you get to 0, the lighter the background will be. If you go to a higher value, closer to 100, the background will turn to a darker shade. So this concludes the presentation of the data binning functionality in ExploreLive. If you have an initial question, you can refer to the KIWI user manual or send us questions at kiwisupport@cognigencorp.com. Thank you very much.